Webinar, the top 10 tips for interviewing and recruiting talent. And I will turn it over to Alex to get us started.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Just a quick introduction. My name is Alex McLean. I am a senior account executive over at SecureTek Solutions. We're a recruitment and staffing firm based out of Glastonbury, but we partner with manufacturers and construction, architecture, and engineering firms and contractors throughout the state of Connecticut. And we focus primarily on technical roles. I lead the manufacturing side of the house for production-based positions, engineering, supply chain, general operations roles. I've been in the recruiting and staffing space for about 15 years. I got my start at an international firm based in Boston. Worked there about 10 years, and then I've been with SecureTek for 5 years. And yeah, so our focus is on Connecticut and building local pipelines of talent for what we see as repeatable skill sets and needs that come up. So we're always looking for folks. Next slide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carolyn Bernardoni. I'm the Director of People and Culture at CONNSTEP. I have over 20 years of HR experience, mainly in the healthcare and manufacturing and insurance sectors. I got my start in HR in recruiting. I probably spent about 7 years as a recruiter when I first got started in my career, and then moved on to a variety of different HR roles for the remainder of my career. But I've probably been involved in the hiring of thousands of people. It would be hard for me to sit down and count, how many people I've been involved in either directly recruiting or interviewing or being a part of joining the organizations I've been a part of. So I've learned a lot along the way, and happy to share any insights or expertise I've learned along the way with all of you as part of this webinar today. Next slide. So here at CONNSTEP, we are very proud to be the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center for the state of Connecticut. We have a very vibrant and strong manufacturing center in Connecticut. For a small state geographically, we are mighty in our manufacturing sector, and we are very privileged to work with the small and medium-sized manufacturers in our state. We are a mission-driven organization, and our mission is to be the trusted advisor and one-stop resource for all things manufacturing for our clients, and we love the work that we do. Next slide, please. All right, so now this part of the webinar, Alex and I are going to go through our top 10 tips for interviewing great talent and bringing great people into your company. And the first tip we have is to know your employee value proposition. And it's a fancy term for basically saying, know as a company why people join you and why your employees stay. And for each company, that's going to be a little bit different depending upon your size, your location, your sector, your leadership, your products, your services, etc. And so here on this graph, you'll see the elements of an employee value proposition would include things like leadership style, training and opportunities, your market position, your products, your social responsibility in the communities where you serve, in addition to things like how much autonomy do people have in their roles, how much variety do they have in their roles, all of these things kind of come together to form an employee value proposition, which, is really why people come to join you, and most importantly, why they stay. And I would say, as an example at CONNSTEP, we have a pretty good sense of our employee value proposition. It's that we are mission driven. Our employees will say, we really care about the mission. We love working with the clients, our small and medium-sized manufacturers. Our employees get a lot, our team members just get a lot of, purpose and meaning out of that work. They find a lot of purpose and meaning in giving back to the state of Connecticut, making sure that, the work that we do is having a strong economic impact on the manufacturing sector in Connecticut. They will say they like it that we're a small team, everybody knows one another. And they will also say that there's a lot of built-in sort of flexibility and work-life balance into the role. And, we may not have the best salaries and pay, compared to some other areas, but we do also have really good benefits. So that's an example of, our employee value proposition. That's an example of why people join us and then also stay. And at your company, it will be something different. And the more intentional you can be in crafting an employee value proposition that aligns with the people that you want to attract and the people you want to stay at your company and that's aligned to your strategy, the better. So knowing your employee value proposition is our first of our 10 tips for recruiting great talent to your organization. Next slide.
Yeah, and I think this feeds in really well to this next slide, Caroline, which is all about kind of the job description process. So once you kind of know what your company can offer, now it's when the individual opportunities come up or multiple opportunities. And so I always start with in my opinion, the goal of a job description is not to necessarily disqualify candidates in the process or discourage people from applying. I think the goal is really to generate as much interest as possible and to gather as much information in regards to resumes or if people are filling out an application online. You want to gather as many people that are relatively in the ballpark to that position. I think a lot of times, depending on the type of role too, it can in certain ways that you may not think about, disqualify candidates for various reasons. So looking at internally, like what are my goals? I want to get as many candidates as possible, and then externally to the audience, I want to attract what I'm targeting as close as possible and understand what their interests are and why they're motivated to be looking at this time. I think looking at where the position will be shared, how you're going to be posting the position is really important. Thinking about, say, places like Indeed or ZipRecruiter, where it's very easy, it's just a click basis. If it's on your website, there's going to be a lot more information about your company there. So someone who's drawn to your website can learn about your company. You may not have to include as much information about your value proposition or those details on that job description. So it's something that can be kind of living and breathing depending on where you're posting it. And I think especially now, I come across so many AI generated job descriptions, and it's very obvious that someone just kind of plugged in and posted it to their website and maybe put in a little blurb at the top of what they're doing. And I think as a starting place that can work, but you can really stand out at the moment if there's some human touch to the job description. So next thing, just looking at the role, technical versus a leadership role versus maybe a production-based role. With the production-based role, really the key is drumming up as much interest as possible, in my opinion. It may not be as technically required. You also have to look at the motivations. I think for many of those roles, I talk to managers all the time who say, "Hey, my main goal is to get someone who has a great attitude and is going to show up and can learn the role. It's not necessarily complicated, but they do need to have a great attitude and learn." Versus a technical role where maybe you have certain requirements, an engineering position or whatever it might be. I would say on the technical side, it's important to keep in mind, especially with engineering. I see a lot of job descriptions that are very, very technical. And it's important to keep in mind for the engineers or someone who has that background, they're going to dissect that job description and go through each thing. And a lot of times they'll disqualify themselves for something that they see on there that they may not have. So I think keeping that in mind, keeping it relatively general, talking more about tasks or focusing on those things. Whereas leadership, they're more organization focused. I've seen job descriptions where they even include an org chart, which that's the main questions they have. Hey, how many direct reports I have? Who am I reporting to? What's the scope of this role? And I would say across the board for any position, the main reason people are looking, what I hear every day is I want an opportunity to grow in an organization. I want someone that I want to work somewhere where they appreciate what I'm doing. So any way that you can bring that out in the description, talking about growth, talking about track records to move up within the organization, I think are really, really helpful. Next slide. Yeah, and so the next one is all about developing candidate pipelines. I think that's a huge conversation we're having right now because we're in a very barbelled experience space. We have a lot of individuals who are maybe further in their career that have great experience and institutional knowledge that are pushing off retirement or nearing retirement. And we also have a lot of candidates that are early career, may not have the skills yet. And then we have that middle group, which is pretty tight, thin, like a barbell. And so a lot of times you're kind of trying to attract that group, but how do you build up into that space? So I think the first thing to look at in line with the value proposition is just understanding internally what your capacities are. If you're a one-person HR team that's handling all the hiring, that's very different than if you have a full team of talent acquisition and a full group that's dedicated and out there trying to find candidates. So I think just looking at the size of your program, okay, what's feasible? What can I do? And what can I institute and where can I get buy-in from those places? What are my opportunities there? So looking at kind of what strategies work best. I know some organizations lean heavily on their internship program, which I think is great, but it's very long term. And so it's if you've had something in place, you may get candidates now, but a lot of times you won't see dividends for quite some time. So I really, in our organization, we lean heavily on our partnerships, especially with educational programs. I think it's a long-term relationship that can really be excellent, especially if you can build relationships with educators in those programs, people who are working directly with students that you can call and say, hey, we have this opening. Who are you working with that you can connect us with that might be interested, or an alumni that you know is looking, or hey, if there's a student who's coming up on graduation soon, let me know. And going in and meeting with those people ahead of time can be really helpful. Getting in the classroom, and then also for internships and those partnerships. I think looking a lot at your current employees and where they've come from is great. And it also is a great way to get buy-in. If you have someone who's on the production floor that maybe went to school at you name it, whatever program, leaning on them, having them go to the class, having them speak with the team, having a connection there is really helpful, and also a great way to get buy-in from the individual group. So lastly, just kind of looking at kind of our structure, how agencies recruit. We lean heavily on our referral basis. We partner with these educational programs. Obviously, we're posting as well, but we're also very heavy in the networking space, kind of getting out there, even working. I've seen organizations that partner with their competitors to compile resources. It's a great way, kind of those sector partnerships, sharing war stories, understanding, okay, we may have openings now, you may not, but let's compile our resources because we can share candidates. So looking at different ways to kind of use your internal network to spread your net as far as possible. Next slide, please. And then this ties back, I think, a little bit to the job description. Just what are the goals I have for this position? Who am I looking for? Is this a role where I'm looking for someone who is attitude and attendance is the main thing, or is it something where it's technical? So what I always say is, looking at a resume, the best resumes tell a story, and they give you an idea of patterns of behavior. Okay, I see this person started here, they grew into this role. It kind of paints a picture. It's almost like a table of contents, and then the interview is where you fill in the book. And I think the next part of that process is looking at and identifying red flags. I think the the major red flags that we all think of are, is this person a job hopper? Are there a lot of extended breaks between positions? Have they seemed to not last in a role for very long, or are there heavy gaps within those spaces? Those are the primary ones that I think we all look at. I think also understanding, okay, maybe there are some pieces that you can fill. So it's the next step is really investigating those red flags and moving in during the interview process and understanding, okay, what's a disqualifier for me and what's worth an interview. Job hopper, it may just be that they were relocating or had family issues. And so it's important to kind of have those conversations instead of just disqualifying at the outset. Obviously, if there are glaring things that are missing, not even the same industry, or the skill set's not even close, maybe that's a disqualifier at this time, but maybe still someone worth reaching out to hold on for a different role that may come up. I think I try to remind our clients as often as possible that that the candidates who are applying, they're not professional resume writers. That's not their job. I think the resume can be a valued resource to show their interest and how dedicated they are and putting towards effort to write a resume, but also understanding they may not have time. Do you really care if this person doesn't have the best language skills? Is that necessary for the position, or is it worth having a conversation? And the amount of times I see a resume that may have missing experience, may not have something for the last 2 years on there, but after a conversation, you realize, oh, they've been working at this company, it's a perfect fit. They just don't have a computer and they aren't able to make those updates. So in our world, in the agency world, we talk to everyone and we try to meet with everyone. Understand that's not always doable or feasible internally, but as often as you can dig in on the interview after those red flags and investigate those during the interview process can be very helpful. And then I think another useful tip is look at the ideal candidate that you have in your organization. This person is an excellent employee, and think back on what their resume looked like at the time of hire. And there may be things that are missing from what they can do, what they're able to do now, or able to, or where they've moved within the organization. But I think it can be a healthy reminder sometimes to say, okay, this person, this is what they look like when they came to us originally. Why did we give them a shot, and incorporate that into your process as well? Working alongside whoever your gatekeeper may be. Managers may have one idea of what they need for the position, but in HR, there's a reality to what the market is and what you're seeing for candidates. And so just having open lines of communication as far as, okay, what is necessary for this position? What's a must-have that we can't move on? And what's a nice to have? And what are the personality and the soft skills that are more important in that in-between space? Next slide.
Great. All great tips. Thank you, Alex. Now we're going to segue a little bit into now you're bringing somebody in for an interview. And one of the tips I've learned along the way, and this works especially well with some roles, but really for me, I use it for all roles, is I like to give interview instructions and see if candidates follow them, and like I said, for some roles, for example, if you're hiring an administrative assistant, or you're hiring for a position where attention to detail and the ability to follow instructions is really important for that role, this works beautifully. And so these are our interview instructions, and it's very simple. We provide people with the address for the garage where they should park. We ask them to bring their validation ticket upstairs. We ask them to ask security to call us. And we give them the names of the people who they will be meeting with, their name and their title. And I ask them, sometimes I remove this, but sometimes I will ask people to bring a couple of hard copies of their resume, just to say if they do. And I ask them to visit our website. So when they come into interview, you would be surprised how many people don't stop at security and just come up to our 10th floor. So they didn't follow the instructions. There are people who don't park in the correct parking garage. There are people who don't bring their validation sticker upstairs. And most importantly, and more egregiously, there are people who very obviously don't take a look at our website or don't do any research, don't know who they're meeting with, don't know what we do. And that is a very, real way for the candidate to show through their own actions and their behaviors if they're putting their best foot forward and really taking the interview seriously and showing respect for the process and coming prepared and organized, or if they're not. And I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a deal breaker by any stretch, but it is input and it is information. And I think when you are going through the interview process, what I've always reflected on is you maybe meet with candidates a couple of hours before you make a decision to hire them to join your organization for years. That's not a lot of time. We put more time in, looking for a house, right? Or buying a car, or other things sometimes. So it's important to use every step in the interview process to assess the person that you're considering bringing into your organization. So this may seem like a really tactical way of doing it, but I have found that if you do this and you pay attention to how people behave and how they either respect or don't respect the process, you can learn a lot about them. And it doesn't make the decision for you, but it's important input into the decision and can work especially well with those roles where that ability to follow instructions and be on time and be organized and have attention to detail, which is a lot of roles, this becomes a really handy tool. So I wanted to pass that along. All right, next slide, please.
You're almost giving them the answers to the test a little bit. And I love that.
You'd be surprised how many don't pass.
Yeah, actually, I think when I came, I forgot to go to the garage. I just parked in the parking lot. So
Yes.
what a fail. It was my second time visiting though, so thought I knew what I was doing. Anywho, so the next part is structuring an interview. I think the process that we see a lot of times is that what's the balance between having the right people in the room and having too many voices that don't necessarily need to be there. And so this comes up a lot. I know we've worked with some organizations where they may say, okay, for this role, we do first round, we'll do a phone call. Then we'll bring someone in for interview with the manager, and then we'll bring them back. And then we'll have a fourth interview with the CEO. And so the catch there is, okay, what are these individual schedules like? what's the CEO? How available are they? How often do they come to the office? How are they accessible? Are they in the same area code or time zone? Are they international? And how will that affect my process? So kind of looking at how do we interview and adjusting that based on the role. So for example, in our world, in the manufacturing world, things move very, very fast at the production-based level. That's one where it's, if you have the capacity, as much as you can bring someone in immediately for an interview and assess them personality, do they show up on time? Are they following the instructions? That's one where it's, okay, this person showing up and having a good attitude and asking questions and coming prepared are the main keys for this role. So having a process that's very streamlined, but also one where you have built-in feedback where you can move quickly. I use the real estate model quite a bit, especially right now. I don't know if anyone's had to buy a house recently, but especially in Connecticut, but things move very quickly, and you don't have the luxury of going in, seeing a house, taking a month, thinking about it, and then making a decision. A lot of times you have to go, okay, saw it, we have to make a snap decision, and because of competition. And I think we're finding, especially with talent right now, intense competition, especially for that thin line of experience. So one of the greatest advantages you can give yourself is speed to employ and give feedback. I think understanding your timeline, who's important to be in the room, who needs to be there versus who is nice to have there. And then if there is someone who needs to be there that is maybe more difficult to get in the room, having flexibility to, okay, that person is going to be a video call or a phone call, and we're gonna figure out that schedule in advance and have set times that we know, okay, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we can commit to 10 minutes for this individual to do a phone call, put it in their calendar, and then it's, that's set and it's not a delay. Communication is really key, understanding the candidate timeline. Do you have other interviews going on? Do you expect to receive an offer soon? Having that open line of communication is really key, especially if things are delayed. The longer the process goes without hearing from the employer, the more the candidate A gets anxious and looks at other opportunities. But it's also a reflection on, okay, what's the decision-making process within this organization if they take a month to get back to me after an on-site interview. So communication goes a really long way, and just having that, it doesn't have to be every day, but just staying in touch with the candidate, especially if they are no longer in the process and you're letting them go. Word gets around quick. if there's ghosting, I know we complain about candidates ghosting, but organizations ghosting candidates happens all the time as well. So for your reputation, it's always a good, it stands out. But yeah, and then also, again, like looking at the role is really important. I know we use production, but also leadership based, having those kind of higher level conversations at the outset are excellent. But again, I think speed is key. Understanding who needs to be there, who is a nice to have in the room, and then who's so that it doesn't delay your process, and then keeping the communication really clear with the candidate so you know where they are in their process, and you can adjust on the fly if it's something you're really interested in. Next slide.
Thank you, Alex. So next we have how to ask interview questions like a pro. And when I interview candidates, I usually have the benefit of meeting them twice. So my first interview will be more of a resume review and really understanding their employment history, why they have moved from one position to another, why they're interested in the position that they're applying for, digging into their skills and experience, really getting a firm handle on their skills, their experience, their employment history, and what they're looking for. And then in a second round interview, I usually dedicate that to behavioral interviewing questions. And if you haven't heard of behavioral interviewing questions, it's a very, very simple technique that provides insight into the way a candidate handled a situation in the past and how they might act in the future. And it is, really just a different way of phrasing your interview questions to learn so much more about people. So I have a couple of examples here, and I picked some very generic interview questions, which is a traditional interview question might be, how do you manage working under pressure and tight timelines? Now, someone can answer that in a very general way. Oh, this is how I typically do it. They'll give you a more general process answer. The behavioral technique is to just add a few words at the beginning. Give me an example of a situation where you were required to work under the pressure of a tight timeline. How did you respond? Now they're telling you a story. They're giving you a real example from their actual work experience of a pressure situation where they were under a tight timeline and how they responded. And so you will be able to assess the situation that they bring forward. You'll be able to assess their behaviors, their actions, the decisions that they made. And it's really interesting, the follow-up questions you can ask when you use this type of interviewing technique. Well, what was the result? What pushback did you get? What lessons did you learn from that experience? And you just get such a better understanding of how the person operates by just using this very simple technique. And so the other example I have here is, as a leader, how do you handle performance issues? This would be the traditional style. And, the candidate can give you a more academic or sort of general answer. But when you use the behavioral interviewing technique, it is so easy. Just at the very beginning, describe a situation where a member of your team was not performing up to expectations. How did you handle it? We at CONNSTEP recently had a leadership position open. We interviewed candidates. We asked this behavioral interview question, and there were several candidates who had a hard time, answering this position. And it really helped separate out, those leaders who had more experienced leadership qualities than those who maybe, didn't. And I would say, in a behavioral interviewing style, the candidate may struggle. You may ask a question and they may struggle to come up with a real example. That's not necessarily a showstopper, but it will tell you, as the interviewer, they may not have a lot of real applicable experience in this area. And now you know that. And you didn't know that before. So it's just a really, really powerful assessment tool. And all you have to do is ask those first few questions, those first few words in the beginning. Give me an example of a time when, describe a situation where, and then ask your question. And it just completely changes the conversation and the dynamic. And you learn so much more about the person's real, actual experience, how they handle situations, how they make decisions, how they respond. And it's so, so helpful. So I wanted to share that tip. Next slide, please. This next tip that I have is, really typically this is done after the interview process and you have a top candidate in mind. You may do this, before you give an offer, or most likely most companies will do the pre-employment due diligence either right before the offer or after the offer, and make the start date and the employment contingent upon successfully completing the background check. At CONNSTEP, we use a vendor called HireRight. They're a national background check firm. There are others like HireRight. That's just who we use.
We use a company called Sterling, similar, kind of that's the equivalent, but on the agency side, that's the main one.
Yeah, exactly. And they perform the background check on our behalf. And I'm just including what we use. There's a whole menu of options of things that you can check. We do a social security and an identity check to make sure that the person is who they say they are. We do an OIG exclusion search, nationwide sex offender registry, and a widescreen criminal search, an education check. We just check whatever they put on their resume as their highest level of education. We check that they did receive that the highest level of education. So if they received a master's degree and a bachelor's degree, we just check the master's degree. And we do an employment report. We check their 3 previous employers and/or 7 years. We check the employment dates and their titles to make sure that they do match their resume and that they're representing their background and their previous employment experience correctly as part of the interview process. And we also do 2 to 3 reference checks. And these are individuals that they, put forward as professional references. And we do ask a series of questions. And yes, there are individuals who, as a result of the background check, we do not hire. And we see that as our due diligence. We see that as a good thing for our organization. We never like to see it happen, but it is sort of the good process, to have in place, and it prevents a sort of longer term issues. So that's
I was just going to add, because we come across this quite a bit as well. We do temp and temp to hire services as well. So candidates are actually under our employment during that period. So we see this all the time. And another thing to keep in mind, just as you're going through the process, is how transparent has the candidate been? Have they let you know, hey, there's something that may come up. It was from this time, and these were the circumstances, and these are the changes I've made. And you'd be surprised. People make mistakes and things come up. Obviously, some things you can't look past, but within that space, I think transparency, having truthful conversations is is key. And you also know, okay, if this person was withholding, if it comes up and they still don't admit it, that tells you some additional insight just into the individual. And just a touch point on this, because it comes up quite a bit, is just the drug screening process now. I think it's looking at, it depends on your organization. I know in particular marijuana has come up quite a bit for many organizations. We have some who test for it, some who don't. So obviously looking at your contracts, your space, and what you need to check for there as well. But obviously investigating the legal components of that process too, and what you can disqualify or have in mind there. So just as we come across. Then my
And
time.
the one I see more often than not is not, Alex, I don't know if you see this, but the one I've experienced more often than not is we do the background check and we find that the person said they worked at X company in X position for 5 years and they worked there for 2 years. Or, we find big, egregious gaps in how they represented their employment history and their actual employment history. And, as an employer, you want to know that before you bring somebody on board. And if I were to say the number one reason why we have not passed someone's background check, it's usually that. I mean, that has been the reason more than some of the others, because sometimes people just don't represent their background correctly, and you want to be able to catch that. So the next slide does go into the drug testing of prospective employees. I use Connecticut law here just because that is where we are. We are the Center for Connecticut. We really deal with Connecticut. And what I would say is if you do have drug testing as part of your employment process, it is important that you are following in the state of Connecticut these 3 requirements. One is that the applicant is informed in writing at the time of application of the intent to conduct a drug test, that the drug test is conducted in accordance with Connecticut state law and procedures, and that the applicant is given a copy of any positive drug test results. It's just really important that you're following those requirements. There's also requirements here around confidentiality, and the bottom line is that drug testing results, records, information is kept with the same level of privacy as an employee's medical records would be kept. So it's really important that those records are being maintained by a professional, hopefully in human resources in your organization, or legal, or someone in a compliance role who really understands how to maintain the confidentiality. And it is a good idea. It is not a requirement, but it is a good idea to have the applicant sign a consent form for the drug testing, which also authorizes the lab to release the results to the employer. So these are just some things to keep in mind if this is a requirement for your employment process. Next slide, please. And this is our last tip, and this is really just to know and understand the legal do's and don'ts of the recruiting process and interviewing process, and really to make sure that you're aware of the legal requirements, but also just to make sure that there is no discrimination or harassment in the recruiting process, and that all applicants are being treated fairly and being assessed on their professional qualifications, not other parts of themselves which may not have anything to do with the job that they're applying for. So I have listed here in the state of Connecticut, prohibits discrimination based on various factors during recruitment, including all of these, these classes. So race, gender, age, religion, disability, pregnancy, or others. So as an example, it would be against Connecticut state law, for example, to ask a female candidate if she's pregnant or planning to have children. It would equally be discriminatory in the state of Connecticut to ask a male candidate if he's planning to start a family soon or have children soon. It's illegal to ask candidates in the interviewing process how old they are. That's not something that you want to do. It's also You know, it's also inappropriate as an example to ask somebody what their religion is. So these are things that would be considered discriminatory. These would be against the Connecticut state law. And more importantly, they have no relevance in the actual job, right? It's really important that we are giving all candidates a fair opportunity in the recruiting process, and that we're assessing them and their skills relative to the job. And, you know, there are penalties for employers that do violate these laws. And aside from the penalties, it's the reputational harm that has the most lasting damage. The reputational harm, both externally and internally, it's not something as an HR person I can say, hand to heart, something you want to face or go through as an organization. It falls into the it's not worth it category. And definitely not something that you want to find yourself in. So it's just really important to not only know what all of these requirements are, but make sure that people in your organization who are responsible for interviewing know these, because sometimes people make mistakes not knowing, you know, that something would be considered, you know, outside of compliance. So this type of interview training with any manager in your organization is really important. So thank you for that. I think that concludes all of our tips. And next we have just some information we want everyone to know about. So we at CONNSTEP, we work with over 500 manufacturers in the state of Connecticut. Many of them have recruiting priorities and need help with recruiting. And so we partner with wonderful experts like Alex, who's joining me today, to, you know, really help our manufacturers both recruit great talent, but also manage this recruiting process, which, as we've just gone through, you know, takes a lot of expertise, time, and attention. So Alex, if you would like to share with the group the services you provide quickly, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I think what's cool is, so we kind of took the agency world, how they operate, what CONNSTEP has offered in the past, and we kind of offered kind of this blended model, or kind of more of an a la carte option. So I know specifically right now there are three main options that we provide in partnership with CONNSTEP for recruitment services for manufacturers or other organizations. And so there are kind of three models. One is essentially kind of an hourly process. Basically, you have CONNSTEP run on an hourly payment basis to drum up and find candidates. So I think of it as, okay, we just need a little more firepower in our organization. We're going to hire CONNSTEP to come in conjunction with SecureTek to find candidates and use their resources, almost outsourcing to us in that resume kind of driving process. So it's a process where you can, it's great, I think, in particular at maybe more like production level or warehouse level roles where there are more candidates. You just need assistance in kind of finding those folks and getting in touch with them. And that's an hourly model that can range for however long you want that assistance for, whether it's for a couple days just to try to find some folks, or extended beyond that. And it's totally malleable. So I think that's a really cool offering that they have. The next one is more of a performance-based, or what we call contingency model in the agency world. It's a situation where there are no upfront costs, and you only pay if you find the candidate that you're looking for, and you hire them and they stick. I think what's really cool about this is that there's a guarantee that the individual, if they don't stay for a certain period of time, that you wouldn't have to pay a fee. And also, if beyond that timeline, if they don't work out, where we'll come in and help find a candidate to replace them at no additional cost. So I like this model in particular for maybe some of those harder to find candidates where you may not find them in a week of searching. It may take a longer time. And then also having that peace of mind of, okay, if nothing comes up, if we can't find a candidate, we're not on the hook for some cost. And then the last one that we put together is what we call kind of more of a flex search or retain model. And it's a blend of the earlier two. It's, okay, I have this role. I want to see if maybe we can find someone in a couple of days or a week, maybe drum someone up. And so we'll pay kind of an hourly process and have SecureTek, have our team kind of put our efforts down for a couple of days, see what we can find. And then if someone comes up, great. That's all we're covered. We'll take the process from there. But if we don't find someone in that time, we can kind of roll into more of that extended contingency or performance-based search. And then if you do find someone from there, we take whatever you paid on the hourly earlier for those services, and we just subtract it from the fee. So it's a couple different offerings, which I think are really cool. And in particular, if you're a smaller manufacturer, having some different options depending on the position, I think is really nice. So it's kind of a choose what fits best for the role in your organization.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Sure.
I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So maybe we just want to mention we do offer we do have a leadership development course called Supervisor Bootcamp, and you can go to our website to learn more about that if you're interested in more leadership development training and content similar to this, or if anyone in your organization is interested. And the next slide. We do have a help page. So if you are a manufacturer in Connecticut and you need help and you'd like to engage with CONNSTEP, here's some information on how you can reach us, either via email, text, or phone. So we provide multiple paths for our manufacturers to reach out and get some help. And the next page. These are just our contact information. And I think now we can take some questions from the audience.